the key to this particular passage of Scripture is in the last sentence, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Some people quibble with the translation perfect. I've seen a number of biblical translations that say, "Be ye therefore good," or "Be ye therefore holy," or various things. It's a great blessing to have somebody translate and teach from the Scripture who lived in the consciousness with which the Scripture was written. There was a story of Yogananda who received a letter when he lived in Boston as a young man. And in this letter, it was an anonymous letter, no, it wasn't signed, but the man or the person who wrote it said that he was wrong, Yogananda was wrong, to sponsor Jesus Christ in America. He said, "Don't you know he never even really lived?" And Yogananda wanted to know who this person was, so he prayed to meet him. And about a week later, he happened to be in the public library, and he saw somebody sitting on a bench by a window. And he went over and sat next to him, and he said, "Why did you write me that letter?" The man was very taken aback. He said, "How did you know?" And Master said, "Well, never mind, but I just want you to know that the power that enabled me to know who you are and where to find you enables me also to know that Jesus did live and that the teachings of his Scripture, of the Gospels, are true. This is the level from which true teaching should emanate. It is not a matter of quibbling with words. It's a matter of deeper understanding. The teaching perfect, "Be ye therefore perfect," is a true teaching, and it sums up the reason for all these other things: to forgive others who hurt you, to be kind to others even though they treat you badly. This all comes under the general heading of achieving a level of perfection that essentially what makes it perfect, because perfect is an absolute word. We're living in a world of relativities. Any concept of an absolute is really beyond human understanding or ability to understand, and so it's easy to understand why people would change that meaning and change that word. But the essence of it is that the goal of the spiritual life is to take you beyond relativity and duality. Therefore, an absolute word is the right word. Good is a relative word. Good is relative to bad. Perfect is only relative to imperfect in the sense that it isn't perfect. Otherwise, perfection is an absolute concept in itself. It's not something about which you can even really form a clear concept, because it's out of the realm of ideas. Let me explain what that's all about. You've had it explained to you many times. It's well worth drilling into our minds that what we want is to get out of duality, to get out of the limitation of ego. Now, this is one of the things that I've dealt with in this new book I've just finished, God is for Everyone. The goal of getting out of ego is something many people balk at. Why would I want to become nothing? The mind defines things quite mistakenly. I remember when I was a boy in school in Switzerland, there was a particular chocolate that I used to love. And I'd save my allowance and go and buy it and just love it. Well, I went back there in 1955. I was 29 years old, or 28, I think, at the time, actually. And I saw this same chocolate, and I leapt for it eagerly with the nostalgic thought of my fondness for it when I was a child. Bit into it and had to spit that first bite out. It was so horribly sweet. How could I ever have liked it? And yet then I liked it. Our tastes change. What children like, adults don't like. What seems wonderful sometimes, later on you think, how could I ever have liked that? Master gave us the illustration of cheese. Somebody who's eaten nothing but stale cheese can develop a taste for it. And somebody says to him, well, I've got a much better cheese here. And he says, oh no, I'm happy with my own stale cheese. But if he gets you to taste that cheese, and if it really is good cheese, if his taste buds have not been so corrupted by usage as to make him just cling to something that's essentially not palatable, he'll see the comparison and he'll say, well, of course, this is much better. That's what he said God gives to us. He doesn't say, be virtuous. Why should you be virtuous? Why should you follow any rule? Because to do the right thing is to find what you want, which is happiness, which is bliss. And to do the wrong thing is that which gives you unhappiness, suffering. And so when you find God, many people say, oh, I can live without God. Once you've got him, you can't, because he's too sweet. There's a beautiful saying of the Curé d'Ars. He was a French saint. Jean Vianney, his name was. He said, if you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy. Because we don't know what the joy is that he could offer us. We don't have that sense of comparison. Therefore we say, well, I like my stale cheese. I like my rotten pleasures. I like my attachments and so on. What Jesus was giving us here was a reason for being kind to others. Otherwise, why should you be kind? Because your daddy's going to approve? Because the state will say fine and pin a nice medal on you? There's a story of Saki's. It's a little bitter humor, but this little girl, well, first of all, it starts out in a train, and these children are all being very rambunctious, and this man is sitting there, and the poor mother can't control the children. So the man says, well, let me take care of them. I know how to handle children. So she said with a gasp of relief, oh, wonderful. Well, the story he told wasn't quite what the mother expected. He began it with a very promising beginning. He said, once there was a little girl, and she was horribly good. They really like that adjective, horribly, with good. And it went on that she was so good that she got all these medals for obedience and being on time and keeping her bedroom neat and all these little things. And so many medals, they were all on her chest, and she was out in the park, and there was a wolf in the park, and she hid in a bush. But the trouble is she had all these medals on, and her trembling made the medals tinkle. So the wolf heard her and went in and grabbed her, and that was the end of the story. And the children said, oh, that was the most beautiful story. And at the next stop, the man got out wondering what the mother was going to do now. Well, anyway, this idea that you've got to be good because somebody's going to approve is what Jesus was trying to get away from. He was giving us a good, solid reason for it. And that's why he talked about, be ye therefore perfect. What does perfection mean? Perfection means freedom from ego, freedom from limitation. Now, ego seems to you, to all of us, our definition. How can we be anything if we aren't what we are? Well, the answer is so amazingly simple, and yet people can't quite tune into it. But they change over the years. They no longer look the same. They no longer talk the same. Their tastes change. And so it is that their sense of I can expand. Where in the beginning, a man can be like Scrooge, where he only thinks in terms of being bitter and getting even with people, not liking people, hurting people, taking for himself. Jesus said it is more blessed to give than to receive. Why more blessed? It's more blissful. It gives you more than you get if you take. How? Because there is this life that became you. That infinite life became each one of us. It's sort of like slivers of glass in the sunlight. No sliver has any light of its own. It gets its light from the sun. And it's all those slivers of light are the same sun. And so this little glimmering of intelligence that we have in our little brains is really a glimmering of the infinite light of wisdom. And because it's identified with a little body, and because this body has gone through a certain limited number of experiences, our sense of self is limited. But one thing you find, when your sense of self expands, and to the extent that it expands, you find more happiness. And when it shrinks, you find less happiness. People who give expand their own identity. They begin to feel the pleasure of other people as well as their own. And they become sensitive to sorrows also. And that's the painful side of it. But to be sensitive to people's sorrows is also very important. It makes you sensitive to a reality that isn't just based on the senses. To be able to feel compassion. Some people ask the question, it's an absurd question, and yet it's one that probably most people ask, and so perhaps it isn't right to call it absurd. It's only absurd when you look at it from the infinite point of view. They say, how could God love people if he allows suffering? No, he doesn't allow suffering in the sense that he wants you to be suffering and you to be happy. He's not that way. But he's created a law by means of which we learn how to thread our way through this bog without getting sucked down and find our way to dry land. This bog of delusion, it's really quite a narrow path and it's not easy to see. But if you can find it, you'll see that bit by bit, you do the right thing. You get to what you want. You get to security, the dry land. Well, we tend in this world to think, well, why should I suffer? The answer is that without suffering, you would never grow. You know, if you have a little child, 2 years old, and he manages to get free for a minute and start out across the street with traffic coming, what are you going to do? Now, Johnny, come back. You know, you might get run over by a car. Now, a car is a big thing, isn't it, Johnny? And you're not going to waste your time doing that. If you do that, Johnny may be halfway across the street. The first thing you're going to do is grab him. And you may, for good measure, give him a good wallop to let him get a little taste of what might have happened if he had gone forward. And some people may say, oh, no, you shouldn't. Well, I don't know. Depends on the individual. I'll tell you, my brother and I were very different types. He was very physical. I was much more on a mental level. And if my brother Bob did something wrong, Dad would give him a good walloping sometimes, if nothing else worked. He wasn't prone to wallop, but sometimes he felt he had to. Bob would just forget about it and go on about his playing. 2 weeks later, if Dad did that to me, I'd look at him and say, why'd you do that to me? I was trying to understand. It didn't seem right. So he understood that he had to treat us differently. But on the whole, sometimes children need a good spanking. Sometimes it's the worst thing for them, depending on the nature of the child, on the seriousness of the situation. The reason I was upset with my father for spanking me was that I had thought I was doing a wonderful thing. Now you tell me if you think this was wonderful. They had painted the bathroom, beautiful paint, shiny. I thought, oh, how lovely. I want to put my improvement on this too. So I took a chisel and scratched a star. To me, that was beautifying it. To them, it was ruining it. Well, I couldn't understand how my father would be angry with me for beautifying the bathroom. He couldn't understand how I could try to ruin that good work that they had done. It's all in the point of view. But the point is that when a child does do that, in one way or another, you've got to make it very clear that this is a wrong thing to do. And it's not for your sake. It isn't. You're not really thinking, well, gosh, I do have 10 children, but I'd hate to lose one. So you even get angry when even one goes out into the traffic. No, you're not thinking of yourself. You're thinking of that child. And so you give him a strong teaching. Well, that's what all this suffering that you see in this world is about. And you don't see the beginnings and you don't see the ends. And so you think it's unfair. It's not necessarily so at all. In fact, it's never so. There's always a law. I've been amazed in my life to see that every suffering I've gone through, and you know, years ago somebody said to me, well, you can write happy songs, you've never suffered. My answer was, it's because I've suffered that I have a right to write happy songs. To be able to find happiness through suffering, in the midst of suffering, even because of suffering. This is what life is trying to teach us. Jesus, if he had really suffered in the way that people think, I don't think he'd have commanded our respect. A lot of people died on the cross. It was a terrible thing to do to them. But that Jesus should weep for himself doesn't seem like that proves anything of who he was. So what has he got to give us if he's going to suffer in time of crisis? He didn't suffer. His suffering, yes, it was intense, was not for himself. It was for other people, for their ignorance, for the fact that so many times, as he himself said on the hillside above Jerusalem, looking down, and he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how many times I could have helped you, and yet you would not. I would have gathered you to my bosom like a mother hen gathering in her chicks, but you refused me." I get confused. English and Italian, I said, you refuted me. That's not right. Italian would say refute, but in English, refused. And he said another very interesting thing in that same speech. I will not come again until you are able to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed are those who can be open to God coming to you in all the forms that he has come, because he has come in many forms. But to say no to them is to be locked in the ego. Now, in the ego, you find that you are celebrating by your attachment to ego, you're celebrating littleness. But the more you can expand that sense of I, the more you find a sense of freedom, of release. When you can feel the sufferings of others, and God certainly feels that. God is that suffering. But he knows that we need it. When I had to have my heart valve replaced, I didn't think the surgeon was being mean to me by taking out my valve and giving me a new one. I knew he was saving my life. If he hadn't, I wouldn't be here today. When a dentist or any medical practitioner imposes suffering on you, it's to cure you of pain, to make you well so you won't suffer again, at least in that way. That's what suffering is in this world. God gives us the experience of pain to teach us a lesson. And when you see, well, for example, all those people who treated the SS people, for example, in concentration camps, do you suppose they all die and go to heaven and have a party? Certainly not. They all do suffer. And they may not clearly remember, but there's something on their level, on the deeper level, that says, I won't do something again. They don't know what it is, but bit by bit they learn as they suffer that they want other people to suffer. We need suffering. Listen, I've had suffering in my life. I'm sure all of you have had suffering in your life. I can say this for myself, that every single real test that I've been through has been absolutely wonderful. It's been the greatest way that I could grow. It was sort of a shortcut. I didn't go to college and sit and take lessons and no, I had to go through it just myself, go through the hard knocks, learn them in a way that no professor could ever teach you. Suffering is the best professor there is. Don't look for it, but when it comes, don't regret it. Be grateful for it and think, what can I learn from this? What is there to gain from it? God doesn't want you to suffer, but He does want you to be free. And what He wants you to be free from, above everything else, is ego. And what He wants you to do in getting rid of ego is not that you suddenly cease to exist. That's not the point of it. What you do is discover that the sense of self, like in all those little slivers of glass, is that one light that makes them all come to life. That sense of self is in every little atom, very inchoate at that form. But self is what comes, what expresses itself. That's why the name self-realization. It's the goal of all life to know what this self really is. It isn't limited to a body. It's that infinite sun shining on this one little sliver, but the light shining on the sliver, not the glass that can cut you, is your reality. The ego can cause you suffering. The body can cause you suffering. The forms can cause you suffering, not the light of self within you. The more you can break that thought of self as being a limited thing, and the more you can begin to see that you're in everything, that you are that self that is in all. You know, when you find God, when you find liberation in God, you're never going to forget who you are. You always will be yourself, but you will be that infinite one who became that little sliver and then realizes, I'm the infinite light. But that doesn't make the sliver cease to exist. You can come back into this form anytime you want to. One time I was walking around the desert with Yogananda. I've often told this story. And he had just finished writing the commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And I remember that he was really in another space altogether. And I remember one time he had his hand on my forearm and I was sort of helping to support him. And at one point he just couldn't walk anymore and he was swaying back and forth and I had to catch him. And then he sort of came down to his body and walked again. He said, you know, I'm in all bodies. It's so difficult to remember which body I'm supposed to keep moving. Well, what a wonderful state to be in. When you can be in everything and yet not lose this little one. It's not that you lose anything, you just expand that identity as the little baby becomes the child, as the child becomes the adult, as the adult gradually grows out of youthful follies and becomes wise, which sometimes does happen, not often. You discover that, you're in awe. A master said to somebody once, you have a sour taste in your mouth, don't you? The man said, well, how'd you know that? He said, because I'm as much in your body as I am in this body. Well, now what Jesus was saying was in saying, be ye therefore perfect, it means reach that point where you know that you aren't limited to that one imperfect form. You are the infinite. To be as perfect as God means to have that limitless consciousness, which is God's. And in that, if you look at the reason for being kind to people and not unkind, charitable to others, not uncharitable, that takes on a whole different meaning. It's no longer a question of moral rules, no longer a question of parental or societal approval. It's much more than that. Okay, I remember when I was thrown out of SRF, and boy, was it with imprecations. Somehow they did not have any idea of what I was trying to do, and just hurled unimaginable charges against me. And thank God they did. I'm grateful for it, because if they hadn't, I would have remained there. I would have written no books, as Master told me to do. I would have written certainly no music. I wouldn't have created Ananda. None of this would have happened. So it was necessary. It was a necessary tapasya, you might say, or penance, to help make the ground fertile so Ananda could grow. But I remember at the time, I looked at the situation, I said, well, it would be normal for somebody to hate them and feel bitter and angry. If I do, who will be the gainer? I'll lose twice. First of all, I'll lose through the suffering they've imposed on me. Secondly, I'll lose through my hatred. How do I gain by hating? How do I gain by being bitter? I only plunge myself into darkness. I choose, no matter how they think of me or how they treat me, I choose to love. It was a very specific, deliberate decision based on an effort of willpower, because I certainly had no encouragement. And yet, it was the right encouragement, the right decision. Because as a result, I've always felt loving. I've always felt loving toward them. I've always felt thankful to God for what He did to me. No, not always. That one's wrong. I became thankful. But I didn't ever lose the love, nor did I lose the inner joy. Well, mind you, when Jesus told us these things, it was for a longer and deeper purpose, not social approval, but your own soul's approval. If you live rightly, you can free yourself of this thought of I. Now, if you look at it from this point of view, you can see that probably the key to all moral teaching is freedom. You know, I asked Master once, thinking of all the different incarnations he'd been in, and some of them he didn't seem to be a master because that wasn't his role. And I said to Master, well, having achieved freedom, being a master and being born in a particular role, do you lose your state of nirvikalpa? Do you lose your sense of oneness with God? Because you shouldn't. He said you'd never lose your sense of inner freedom. A fascinating answer, one I've spent many years meditating on. Inner freedom is really the key to moral teaching. If you have this inner freedom, whether for the moment you're in nirvikalpa samadhi, which would have been a very inconvenient state to be in some of the roles that these masters sometimes have to play on earth, they have to go through the show. But to have that sense of freedom is enough. Whatever you do, you know, you're not involved. Master said one time, even the simple thought that you're not free keeps you from being free. Now, when you have some quality that you want to overcome, let's say, to make it ridiculous, you love orange juice. Now, that's not a fault. It's only a fault if you're too avid for it. So I've named that so that you don't think, oh, he means me. I doubt that anybody here is obsessed with drinking orange juice. Nonetheless, if somebody tells you you shouldn't have any desire for anything, therefore don't be attached to orange juice, the natural inclination would be to say, yeah, but, negative affirmation, I don't want to want orange juice, doesn't help you. I don't want this which I avidly cling to as an affirmation of what you're avidly clinging to, because that thought's stronger than not wanting it. But if you can make the freedom, if you can bring it back to the ego and its tie, it's sort of like, you know how when Gulliver landed on Lilliput, and here he was, this huge creature on the like a beached whale there, and they were afraid of him. And so they took their ropes, which were really only like little threads to him. They took enough of them, and with them they were able to tie him down before he came back to consciousness. So it is. One little desire for orange juice is not so difficult. But you get a million of little desires. I know Master one time said, well, he always said, but this one time he talked about it, the need to give up all desires. I said to him, well, sir, even the desire for, let's say you've had a desire once for an ice cream cone, thinking that he would say, oh, well, no. You know what he answered? I was a bit shocked. He said, oh, yes. I mean, God, that's a bit much, isn't it? But you know, it's just one little thread, only one, but you multiply it by a million and you've got yourself tied down. And you can't go around thinking, no to ice cream, no to orange juice, no to this, no to that. No. You can't do that. The process of neti is a very slow process. But if you get back to your ego, and you notice that what it is a little bit of energy going out, and if you can somehow snip all that right at the close to the trunk, let's say, where all these threads are going out, it's a lot easier. You can shave them all off. In other words, live in the thought of freedom. But freedom's a vague word, whereas being complete in yourself is not. And any time you enjoy anything, always try to enjoy it with the thought of, I'm complete in myself. I don't need this. I like this inner release, this inner completeness. The more you can develop that thought, the more you'll find that really serious desires, like money, this is one of the big delusions. And it's not easy to get rid of if you've got it. There's always that strong pull toward, I mean, you can tell somebody that he shouldn't want money, he'll say, right, I don't want money. Oh, wow, they've got this wonderful treasure they discovered down in the Caribbean. And before you know it, he's just lighting up with all these samskars have deep roots in the subconscious. You can't so easily get rid of them. But if you can get back to your sense of I, this is where it all begins. I, not definitions. Definitions are very hard to shake. But the completeness of the I is not so hard to shake. I want to get even with people. I want to get this. I want to own that. All of these thoughts of I, they're all rooted in that thought. And if you can get back to your ego and cut out that thought of I want it, you'll be surprised how quickly you can find yourself free wherever you go. The little things like ice cream, well, go ahead and get it. It takes too much energy. But even when enjoying an ice cream cone, always remind yourself the joy that you're feeling in that ice cream cone, which is really not even joy, it's pleasure. It's really inside yourself. And the more you can bring it back to I, the more you can say, no, I don't need that. I'm complete in myself. I need nothing. I am free. I own nothing. I am free. If you can make the thought of freedom your principal moral code, you'll see that nothing, bit by bit, seems to touch you. You've got to be able to do it as easily in time of difficulty as in time of joy. This is essential. If you don't do that, then as much as you suffer, so much will you have to enjoy. Because life is a duality. To have the one means to have the other. That's why when I go to the dentist, I don't take Novocaine. It's because it's a good mental discipline to accept the pain and thus not be bound. And then the pleasure comes, you're not bound. And you begin to see that wherever you go, yes, you can enjoy it, but it's like Master when he went to Radio City Music Hall and he paid the entrance fee, went around, enjoyed this possession, and when he was free, enjoying it, finished with enjoying it, he went back, went to the door, gave the music hall back to the management and left free. Or another story, when I was in New Delhi many years ago. I had tea, I should say, at the home of the Chilean ambassador. And he was a wealthy man. I think that's probably why he had that title, plenipotentiary. Anyway, he had a beautiful chinaware set that he served the tea in. It was a pleasure for me, not for him. All the way to the living room, as the servant was bringing this, now wash your stuff, watch that rug, don't strip over the rug. Oh my God, these servants, the way they treat these things, they don't know their value. All through the tea, he kept talking about how servants just don't understand these things. He kept talking about this chinaware. I don't think he enjoyed it for one moment. I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was beautiful. And when I left, I gave it back to him, and that was it. You don't have to own things to enjoy them. Enjoy this world with a sense of freedom. How much more beautiful a sunset is if you can enjoy it like that and not think, as some wealthy man might, that's coming down on my property. Enjoy it for itself. Enjoy life for itself. Enjoy people for themselves. Don't, when somebody does something differently from the way you do it, well, they don't do it the way I do it. So maybe that's good. I remember going to Mexico many years ago, and they were inefficient, as you sort of expect them to be. And there were these Americans there grumbling over the inefficiency. I said to them, listen, we're in a different country. Why not enjoy the way they don't do things? I mean, if you wanted just what you've got at home, why leave? It's good to be able to enjoy other opinions. I remember Master telling this time of this occasion when somebody was trying to convince him of his very fundamentalist ideas. Mind you, I'm an absolute fundamentalist, but in another sense. I believe in the original teachings of Jesus, in the original truths of the Bible, in the basic teachings the Masters came to bring us, and not the stupidities that human beings have ladled onto them like heavy soup. But this man was bringing his usual their kind of fundamentalism out and trying to convert Master. And Master said, well, do you take literally everything that's in the Bible? Yep, I sure do. Master said, well, consider the Garden of Eden. He said that we hear that the serpent was talking to Eve. He said, serpents don't talk. In Adam and Eve's day, they did. Master finally, with a great delight in his heart, because he was always delighted in himself, and he took his hat off. He always wore a hat. And he said, I bow to the colossal temple of ignorance I behold before me. But he could enjoy and even respect ignorance. He wasn't insulting the man. He was really appreciating this twist of ignorance, which really amounts to a sort of genius. The ability to enjoy all things is only possible to the extent that you take yourself out of the picture. When you can just see people for what they are, things for what they are, enjoy them as they are. Always, when you suffer, it's because you've allowed yourself to get into the picture. You know, I had an experience. I may have told you this experience a year ago. I had a tooth broken. I think I told it to you. And I went to the dentist, and the break was right up there at the gum line. He said, there's nothing I can do. I can't, there's nothing to fix it onto. I've got to drill a post there and then glue this thing on. It's going to take me, I've got to drill the stub there to make it accepted. It's going to take me 4 visits. I said, doctor, I don't want that. I just do it, go ahead and do it. He said, but I can't do it in just one time. I've got to give you Novocaine. I said, forget the Novocaine. He said, all right, as if he was really going to show me. Well, yeah, it hurt, no doubt. But I just thought, well, so life gives you pain, life gives you joy. These are a few minutes in a dentist's chair, but I lived a long life, a few minutes out of that long life. I can invest them. You just don't have to take this moment that seriously. When things are difficult, when they're painful, when they're suffering, let it be. Tomorrow it'll be different. And if it isn't, it'll be different in the astral world. But however, however it is, it's not going to be a permanent thing. The only permanent thing is the joy of your own being. Live in that joy. And you'll see that if you can have that inner sense of freedom that doesn't allow yourself to say, I'm the one who's suffering, I'm the one who's in pain, you'll be amazed how free you can feel under all circumstances. And if there are things that you want to overcome in yourself, and I think that if there aren't things that you want to overcome in yourself, you're in the wrong place, on the wrong planet. We're all here because we've got something wrong with ourselves. But we're trying to get out of it. We should face that fact cheerfully. The fact that suddenly you discover that you've been this horrible person should be cause for gratitude. Oh, thank God, I've finally discovered what a horrible person I am. Now I can do something. Don't allow yourself to be hypnotized by your shortcomings. Say, well, I do see it's a shortcoming. Okay, get rid of it. There isn't anything in yourself you can't change. But if you become attached, then it's very difficult. Don't worship your mistakes. Be free. The more you can have that inner sense of freedom, the more you'll see that the most difficult habits can be just sloughed off like the skin of a snake. The freedom of living in virtue, the freedom of living in joy, comes when you seek perfection. It can't come with any other motive. But when you have that final aim, that purpose, then you see that everything can add to that joy. Everything is a doorway to bliss.